Hi, it's Colleen Schmidt, once again from Divination Counseling Service. Today I'm going to present the new moon chart of October 16th, 2020. And we're going to take a look at what I like to refer to as a continuing saga. I'm seeing a real theme throughout the last several charts that I have done. And I relate back to the October 2nd Venus ingress into Virgo, for example. But on a larger note, I'd like to share with you all that I attended a summit. Actually, I only attended a few of the courses. I actually bought the pass so that I could have access whenever I wanted to the videos, which were copies of the summit lectures. And it was really fun and very inspiring to me as an astrologer. I really encourage, because we have the internet and well, all this wonderful technology, the fact is that it's really good for things like astrology because you can connect with other astrologers. For example, the summit took place all over the world. So each of the presenters were able to, whether they were Dutch or German, English, Canadian, wherever they were in the world, they were Australian. They were able to present during this summit. And I thought that was really, really amazing. The other thing is I'm a Uranian asteroid astrologer, and it was really nice to touch base with something I did prior to that, which is more Western astrology, more Hellenistic astrology. It's the ancient astrology, just other different old stuff that I did actually in the very beginning when I studied maybe the first 20 years or 18 years that I did astrology. The last, since 94, yeah, I've changed, and it was really nice to go back into that. But one of the things that I want to share with you, one of the things that I came away with as having now seen 2/3 of all of the lectures. I think I have a couple more to see, which I'm really excited to do, and I always make it special. But is that there's a running theme because 2020 has been a year where we've actually are living through a change of an age. And how we know that as astrologers is because the outer planets begin to line up at the same place. And in this case, it's the latter degrees of Capricorn. And we've got Pluto, Jupiter, Saturn. So we've got a lot of stuff there. And the lining up is what they call, and I'm hoping I'm saying this right, a zeitgeist. A zeitgeist. And it's not something that happens regularly. It doesn't happen very often at all. And the fact that we're now living in one is probably one of the reasons why some people are waking up to astrology. It's interesting because things that I heard at the summit and in the lectures were things that I actually have said in my life, like I'd love for this subject matter to be taught in high school. I think that is something that we could aspire to for the future, because it would just help people as they're going through some of the more awkward stages of life to understand things, to get a better handle, to be more objective, less emotional, less reactive. Astrology is good for all of that. And there's so much that can be gleaned from what we gain through this subject matter. So knowing that we're coming into an age, we're leaving the earth behind, 200 years of earth. We had a little dabble in the early 80s, 82, I believe. And from there, it went back into Earth, where it had been for 200 years. It goes about 200 years, this cycle. And when we're approaching air, again, last time, I believe, I can't remember which presenter it was, but he pointed out that it was 1200, the year 1200. So when I was hearing things like this, and I've been saying this to you, the people who are watching, I've been talking about the importance of what we're going through, how we are changing, evolving, ascending. I can name all of the words that I've even been using in the last handful of videos, because what we're going through is so very significant. And it may make you feel like you're anxious or going crazy, but really it's the soup you're now residing in. So it's a tough thing, and yet it's a great thing. The beauty of it is that you could go through decades of time and not see a whole lot of change. And then you could hit a period where in a few weeks you see decades of evolution. Well, we're in one of those years where every few weeks some bomb is dropping on us in some way, and it's causing us to rise above, if you will. And that is what the stars are asking us to do. So I just wanted to give that little, off the subject kind of thing, just to talk about that. I really enjoyed tremendously. It's astrology.com, Astrology University, .com. Check it out. Check out other things like that. I also teach, but get involved in some of these things that are going on, these lectures. That's why the YouTube videos are so important, because this is a really important subject matter, astrology, because it is a lot of an air subject. It's interesting, people say we're going into the age of Aquarius, as Saturn and Jupiter will be going into Aquarius, meeting there for the first time in December of this year. We'll be talking about that. And what does that mean? Well, think about astrology is an Aquarian subject. It's very air, it's very objective, it's very humanitarian, it's Aquarius. And it's funny because in the whole thing, I'm even listening to a panel. So far, I've not heard of, like 3 more lectures to go. Nobody's really made that reference yet, We're leaving behind something so that we can move to our head, so to speak. And what better subjects to help us understand all of that than astrology? So I'm sorry about that little lecture, but I just had to tell you, and I had to talk that up. I also want to thank you if you're a subscriber. Thank you, thank you. Thank you for the comments, the likes. I really do appreciate the interaction. I help, and I thank you for your help in helping me develop a channel. So thank you all. Now, let's talk about the new moon chart, okay? So with that said, let's move, okay? And oh my, I'm behind. Boop. There we go. Okay, so I'm gonna, sorry about all that little interlude. I'm not even gonna cut it out, just, have to accept these imperfect videos. The chart we're looking at is for Washington, D.C. I live close enough to Washington, D.C. that it's pretty much the same. The East Coast, it's our capital of the country. It's a really good place to do a chart from if you want to be sort of general or mundane. Always, though, it's good to do charts for your location, depending on where you live. So in this chart, we're looking at an Aries point ascendant descendant, okay? I know that for some of us, we're going, but wait a minute, that's Aquarius. There's nothing Aries there. 15 degrees of fixed is known as the Aries axis. I apologize for the sirens. So we're looking at the Aries axis, okay? So that would be 0 degrees of cardinal, 2230 of any cardinal, 15 degrees of fixed, and 7.5 degrees, 730 of mutable. So just, this is part of what makes that X in a chart. So our ascendant is the world at large for this chart. Now, the reason I like starting with the Janus on this one is because I really want to point out here that there's really nothing residing. Now, a lot of aspects to, that's a part of fortune there, but there's a lot of aspects to that ascendant, but that ascendant itself doesn't have anything there. And it's also a time of Mercury retrograde, okay, and Mars retrograde, okay. How do I put this? I just don't think that when I read for a client, sometimes the situation will present itself that I'll say, well, I don't I think it's more of what's occurring on the outer parameters that you're being, in other words, it's your reactions. It's you're reacting to. It's more of a reaction. And I feel that that could be the case this particular month because there aren't any, and you can see, I'm looking now, there are going to be asteroids and there are going to be trans-Neptunians, and I'm going to get to that in a minute, but I always start off with the simplest chart format. And here we have a lot of aspects to the ascendant, but not a whole lot of, and it's also pretty, some of them are pretty nice actually, some beautiful trines. So yeah, the sun and the moon are actually trining. It's a little wide, but when you talk an angle, you can go about 10 degrees. And and then there's a much sharper, there's a sextile here, and then a little bit sharper of a square to Uranus. So you can see where, and in conjunct, I love this, a very strong in conjunct. And it's pretty difficult to get in conjunct, semi-sesquiquadrats or whatever, I can't even say them, but think of this, in conjunct. And the in conjunct here, that does have to be pretty close in order to be in aspect, and it is. So whatever's going on is kind of bruising us a little bit financially, okay? Now, it's interesting because you would think that we would be more bruised financially because we're in this COVID thing and all of that, but really according to this, because of the trine to Uranus and all of the trines to Jupiter and Pluto, not so much Saturn, there's really nothing there. You really do get this impression here that we are financially, now I know it's hurting time for people, but we're learning to adjust, whatever that means. And it could even mean that during this time period, we're hearing more about the stimulus, which is also very possible. It's interesting because whatever is being announced does rub that Venus. That I do, because an in conjunct, it's kind of necessary for some things. I've heard it called a creative aspect. But I also find that things kind of, you have to have one to have it happen sometimes. Okay, so there's some kind of brushing against Venus to that ascendant. Now, the thing I wanted to look at with this very simplistic chart before I move into more complicated aspects, well, we can look at those here, some of those aspects. I wanted to talk about the 8th house. And, it's really interesting. The Aries ascendant, kind of makes you feel like whatever is affecting that chart is coming from the greater world. And in the 8th house, it could have to do with shared or combined finances, okay? Resources, okay? Resources. And that sun and moon, very sharp square. So this like new beginning has a lot of hard edges to it. And looking at just the square to Jupiter square to Pluto square to Saturn, and I'm going to be talking about that in a minute, that creates a lot of friction. Okay, a lot of anxiety, a lot of tension, a lot of energy. Squares create a feeling of like that, okay? I'm a good one to describe it. I have a lot of them in the chart, in my own personal chart. And then we top it off with that square. Then remember that Uranus is also square the ascendant. So some of the things that are going on with shared resources or shared monies could be bringing in some conflict, and it will be also very unpredictable. Okay. What we're hearing or dealing with again could relate to money, finances, but I think what's the bigger picture is that it might be finances that are not so much personal, or they are a part of something larger, a resource, if you will, rather than a second house. But it's going to make people angry in the second house. So look at for a value system. So in whatever you're doing, make sure that you're being ethical. Okay, that's really important right now. So before I add in more material, let's look at some of these squares. I'm going to be really quick about them. I wrote the article, I really generalized in the article because I didn't want the article to be very long, and I don't want the video to be very long. Basically, what we're talking about here is these squares are 8th to 12th. I mean, it's also very spiritual in those two houses as well, and a lot of things also maybe coming out from behind the scenes. And you really get this sense here of it's a really difficult time. And this is really true whenever you have Sun square Saturn. It's really unlucky. It's difficult. And the interesting thing is normally it's only a few days, but it may last a bit longer because of showing up in the new moon chart. It talks about how there could be encounters that are imposing, powerful pressures. It could either be pressures to change or it's pressures as a result of change. It talks about things that are changing are not working well. And that could be another economy issue here with this Venus in the 7th in Virgo. And remember that also Venus in the 7th is about in our one-to-one encounters, which from this chart are very nice, especially in terms of like people wanting to serve other people, which does bode well for compassion. But that Venus is also opposite Neptune. And it means that we have to have clearer perceptions of A, our feelings about other people, and B, our finances in particular. Okay? It talks about how because things are not working well, there can be breakdowns. It's, there's a lot of excesses going on. See, that's the other thing, you can't afford excesses right now. What? Between the 2nd, 20 degrees Mars, and look at that Sun and Moon in opposition. This is not the time to be extravagant. And that's something that I think is going to be a little bit of a hurdle for some people. Okay? It talks about to be careful not to take on too much, not to be overtly generous, not to be overtly optimistic. Sun, Jupiter. But it's a square. This is not the time. This is much more of a time to be prudent and to, as I said in the last 2 videos, cross your T's and dot your I's. Don't try to rush things at this time period, particularly not changes. It will not go well. Basically what's going on is that you can't let the ego get very involved. Okay, so if the Sun represents the ego and all of these squares and oppositions, and then opposite, so you're talking T-squares basically, between Mars, Pluto, Saturn, Sun, okay? It's heavy stuff. That's really a tough chart. And what derives from this is patience, the ability to organize, the ability to and I'm going to get to this, but to restrain, to rise above some of the emotional stuff. Irritability is a part of this, restlessness, but be wary of your ego or self-assertion, because the minute you try to self-assert yourself, many people will go up against you. And of course, it's a political time, so that's going to also play out in this. There tends to be a weakening of relationships with others, but I want to comment on this. There is. Right now is not going to be great for a lot of relationships, but I have been talking about this for 2 or 3 of these charts, and I've told you that right now many of us are prioritizing, paring down, if you will, to people that more or less think like we do, because there is too much division out there. And isn't it interesting? Because politics is so divisive. It's a depressing and restrictive time. This is not good for relationships with authority figures in general, which makes me feel that there's going to be more issues regarding the president, okay? Although I don't see how there could, but that's just my opinion. I don't see how there couldn't be. But I'm going to be right now, I'm going to tell you, the weight of the world feels very heavy. And the irony is that is a transit more than a reality. But it's about us and understanding what is that reality? What is the true reality? And how much are we deceiving ourselves? So again, here's, I'm going to be getting into some of the better stuff. This is also a time to be active and creative, but not active in a way that pushes your own agenda, but active in a way that can be beneficial to either yourself or to others. The way that you decide or the path you choose to take could be that you need to take it slow, methodically. Really, just looking at what you have before you and knowing that you have to take all of these steps to ensure that it will work right. And I think that and there's a number of people out there that will do that, as long as we don't push, as long as we don't shove, as long as we are not forcing our opinions or our ideas on others, it's really not a bad time. I will say this though. You still need to be careful of your blood pressure. You still need to be careful of inflammation. You still need to be careful of the fact that there will not only will your days be so demanding in the next month, but you also have to realize that it's like a day that never ends, only that happens for days at a time in a row. So it just feels like you might be on a treadmill for a minute. And when the sun squares Saturn, it can bring what I like to refer to as temporary depressions. They don't always last. They don't even last hours or days sometimes, but those moments where we just kind of get down on how much work everything is, how much of a burden it is, how much of a burden life is. So that's my interpretation of I'm just making sure I went through everything. I have a whole set of other notes that I want to go through here. Now I'm going to, while I'm on this program, okay, I'm going to throw up the trans-Neptunians because I can. Okay, so let me grab them. And Chiron. I'm not going to bring in any of this other because I don't need it to prove my point here. Okay, so we just doubled the amount of what we see in our chart. And you'll notice right here that we do now have something on that IC. And I just got done saying, don't do things quickly. Make sure that you are taking care and doing everything that needs to be done to ensure success. And there shows Adamite. And Adamite reminds us that it's really important that we get to the bottom of matters, that we have a good foundation, if you will, and that Adamite is about, I'm going to be honest with you, is pulling in. It's about decrease. It's about solidifying, okay? And that's going to be really important. So I wanted to point that out because that is such an important aspect of what is going on. Now, as I say that, look at this 3 degrees, 28 minutes of a midheaven. You notice how the Adamite is there. Yes, we already know that. That's us taking our time. But let's look at this guy, Volcanus. Yeah, it's a lot of pressure. That's where the anxiety comes in, and a lot of pressure. It's going to be kind of hard to constrain ourselves because here Zeus is not far from the sun. See how the picture just went three-dimensional as soon as I applied those trans-Neptunians. So as I always like to point out, that when you begin to add things into the chart, two things happen. You get a lot more detail, becomes almost three-dimensional, and you get what I refer to as repeat themes. And what I mean by that is, look at Volcanus's pressure that it's adding to compress. It's adding, it's like contracting, And look at that. And then look at this trine to the midheaven, as if to say that whatever we're gaining through that experience is helping us as we march toward the future. Really interesting stuff. And that does have to do with how we're living and how we're of service on a day-to-day basis, because that's what that sixth house represents. And you want to look at everything as a house. If you were to look at this in your own charts, you would take this chart and you would put this inside of your chart or outside of it and see how your planets then line up with it. Okay. Just a little point here. Mercury and Uranus are in opposition, and that's kind of also restless energy. So we get this restless energy, we get this anxiety, we get this all over the chart. It's a lot of internal, because both of those planets, the work we're doing right now is maybe more internal, and I think that's a really good way to look at it. But I like to point it out because it actually is also forming a T-square with the ascendant. So it's as though the ascendant is going to be triggering whatever's going on in our environment in the next month is going to set everything up. It just kind of sets it off. Now, just to kind of finish up, I want to talk about the angles. So I'm going to bring up all the asteroids. No, it's not all of the asteroids. So I am going to point that out. For example, child is on here. Something about a child is on, and this could be the child within. It could be your own children. It could be something in the news. Remember, this is the Aries point related to a child. That's not on there. Okay. Crone is also not on there. So, but is a part of this picture, okay? Because we can go out 10 degrees either way. So one of the things it's talking about is how things are not going quite the way that we thought they were. We had a lot of intuition about what's going on. We kind of figured things to be a certain way, but they're not. The other thing is that maybe it's because we need to have better boundaries, particularly with people who are close to us, okay? And, you know, when you look over here, it's because things are out of control. That's, but it could faith on, but it could also be that, that the health or well-being concept is out of control. And that does not bode well for our numbers with coronavirus. So I definitely wanted to mention that. There's something about photographs. And then you get the idea here of withdrawing, which may be people around you withdrawing, could be you withdrawing, but there's something about a withdrawing. And also could be something that we're hearing. Could be something, especially in the political concept. Remember, this is going on for at least a month, and it could have something to do with the election itself. The Adamite also comes up with Adamitas, both of those being asteroids. Now, we already know that Adamitas is down here, but there's an asteroid here. And they both refer to advice. And I believe the advice is going to be to consolidate, to shut down, to close up. I'm not going to say that we're going to get that. I think it could be something we're hearing. I think there could be some going back to some more restraints, though, in our future coming up as a way to take care of, you know, ourselves. I almost want to say this looks almost like they're going to close restaurants, but yet the restaurant itself is out of orb, so I'm not sure. Maybe a certain areas. I know they're doing it in Europe, so in that respect, it has already begun. The the midheaven, on the other hand, doesn't show a whole lot. Still, it does talk about praying and pride. I think that's really interesting since there's an issue with the SCOTUS election going on right now. And I don't want to make any predictions about that. I have in my mind made some predictions, but this chart seems to talk about that somewhat too. And at the very least, we might find that got delayed. And it may have gotten delayed because of a health factor that's out of control. So I am going to make that prediction. Okay, I don't know what else is going to happen, but I do believe that there's going to be at least a delay, if not a complete of the whole thing. So, not sure. Don't want to really speculate on that, but I do have to say this chart does seem consistent with the last two, which I believe I said in both of those charts, the Venus ingress chart as well as the full moon chart, that I did not think it was a good idea for them to push and ram this as quickly as they are during a time when the skies are telling you exactly the opposite. And I think that is one of the reasons why we should all study astrology. So let me come back for a moment to say goodbye. And once again, thank you all for allowing me into your life. And most of all, thank you to anybody who subscribes to the newsletter, the YouTube channel, or to my website. I appreciate so much your support. Thank you. And as always, happy readings.